Hello, it's Kate here again for my Authistic blog. This week's been a bit fraught and ADHD and autism don't help at all. So I'm just expecting some building works next door, and sensory overload is one of those things which really bothers us greatly. Well, I think it bothers most people, but many autistic people just can't switch off from noise, and just as many of us love songs and music, we can have extreme reaction to other sounds and other senses, but I'm just mainly talking about sound. Chris Packham addressed this in his recent programme. He did a couple of programmes inside the autistic mind. He mentioned the apparent contradiction of sensory avoidance and sensory seeking, and that, sensory seeking would be, seeking out certain tunes or music that you love. But I'm mainly talking about sensory avoidance today. So for me, I'm hugely distressed by unexpected noises, and the louder they are, the worse it is, like scaffolders, builders, but even sort of lower level noise like impact noise, for instance, footsteps above me or sudden bangs from the floor above or next door. And it makes living with neighbours distressing and having to rely on their goodwill. And if the soundproofing isn't ideal, that just adds to the distress. So I will talk about this more in relation to one of my books in a later blog, but I don't have the spoons at the moment to put it together. So this is all in anticipation of the upheaval next week. But last time during lockdown, we had the balcony above us done, and the hammering and crashing, pounding and resounding through our small abode, and we just couldn't escape during lockdown. And one day I had a migraine, and I ended up shouting at the builders and having a massive meltdown. Our housing association hadn't given us any warning either. So this time, and having a diagnosis of autism, I have taken the bull by the horns and we've decided to escape. But, we like to know exactly what will happen and when, but the weather might be bad, and so the builders might delay, and that's all just another grist to our anxiety mill. Other things that I've always hated and had no idea they were related to autism, in me anyway, is phones suddenly ringing. You don't know who it is, and why are they phoning at this time. And other people have mentioned this. I didn't realise that when you're in control of the phone call, it's a bit better. But when I was a teenager, particularly as a child, I didn't bother to answer them. That was my parents' responsibility. But when I was a teenager, phone calls didn't go to answer phone. We didn't have one. And this is the sort of phone that we had as a child. A bit like this is a 1940s old Bakelite thing, but ours was a sort of similar 1960s with the big, it was a party line actually, but I didn't worry in those days because I didn't have to answer them. But they're quite fascinating, quite heavy, but that's why I've got one as an ornament, but it's not connected. And I wrote about this again in another book, a phone like this, in Did You Whisper Back? But those phones, in the 70s, it was a typical 70s one without the thing on the end, but it was more plastic than Bakelite. But they would just ring and ring until someone answered the fucker, excuse my language, or until they finally rang off. And I always feared it was someone for me, so I just ignored it if I could. But someone, aren't you going to get that? So anyway, there's also visual sensory overload. I'm not going to mention that much, but I hate flashing lights, and don't even start me on GIFs or GIFs or whatever if they're flashing. And why? What's that about? I can't. It's coming at me, and and they can trigger all sorts of reactions and conditions in the neurologically sensitive. Like things like migraines And you know, a lot of visual information can cause is a factor in agoraphobia, which I'll talk about more another time. So not much about writing today, but I do hope to talk about those books that I briefly alluded to in a later blog. But just to say, my special interests like writing get disrupted too with any upheaval. So this whole building thing is a massive one for me. Anyway, thank you for listening today, and that's what I wanted to have a bit of a rant today. Thank you. Bye for now. Or I will be writing it up as well in the other blog, the written blog. Bye.